May 2005. A sun-drenched Caribbean island, white sand beaches, crystal blue water. Paradise, right? But for one Alabama teenager, this tropical getaway would become the setting of one of the most baffling disappearances in modern American history. 18-year-old Natalee Holloway had everything going for her. Honor student, full scholarship to the University of Alabama, a bright future in medicine. She went to Aruba with over 100 classmates to celebrate their high school graduation, a final hurrah before college life began. She never came home. What happened on that island in the early morning hours of May 30th, 2005, sparked an international investigation that would last nearly 2 decades. It generated thousands of headlines, mobilized governments, and tore apart families on 2 continents. Dutch Marines, FBI agents, volunteer search teams, and even fighter jets were deployed in the hunt for answers. And yet, despite all of this, despite confession after confession, despite arrests and releases, despite searches by land, sea, and air, Natalee's body has never been found. This is the complete story of the Natalee Holloway case. A story about a young woman whose life was cut tragically short, about parents who refused to give up hope, about a suspect whose web of lies would eventually trap him, and about the relentless, exhausting search for truth in a case where nothing was ever quite what it seemed. Over the next hour, we'll walk through every twist and turn of this investigation, from that fateful night at Carlos and Charlie's nightclub to the shocking confession that came nearly 20 years later. We'll examine the searches that covered every inch of Aruba, the legal battles that crossed international borders, and the questions that still haunt everyone who followed this case. Because this isn't just a true crime story. It's a reminder of how quickly everything can change, how vulnerable we all are, and how some mysteries refuse to be solved, no matter how desperately we seek answers. This is the story of Natalee Holloway. Before we dive into what happened on Aruba, we need to understand who Natalee Holloway was, because she was so much more than just a headline. Natalee Ann Holloway was born on October 21, 1986, in Clinton, Mississippi. When her parents divorced during her childhood, she moved with her mother, Beth, to Mountain Brook, Alabama, one of the wealthiest suburbs of Birmingham. She lived with her mother, her stepfather, Jug Twitty, and her younger brother, Matt, in what seemed like an all-American family. Those who knew Natalee described her as driven, responsible, and intensely focused on her goals. She wasn't just a good student, she was exceptional. Member of the National Honor Society, advanced placement courses, the kind of teenager who balanced a demanding academic schedule with an active social life, somehow managing to excel at both. Her hard work paid off. By senior year, Natalee had earned a full academic scholarship to the University of Alabama, where she planned to study pre-medicine. Her dream was to become a doctor. At just 18 years old, her future seemed limitless. But Natalee wasn't all textbooks and studying. Friends remembered her as fun-loving and outgoing, someone who enjoyed being with her classmates and participating in school activities. She was, in many ways, a typical American teenager, someone who worked hard but also knew how to have a good time. In May 2005, Natalee joined more than 100 of her Mountain Brook High School classmates on a senior trip to Aruba. It was a tradition, a chance for graduating seniors to celebrate together one last time before heading off to college. The group stayed at the Holiday Inn near the northern end of the island, with several adult chaperones supervising the trip. For 5 days, the students soaked up the sun, hit the beaches, and enjoyed the freedom that comes with being 18 and on the verge of adulthood. Everything was going according to plan. It was supposed to be the perfect ending to their high school years, a memory they'd carry with them forever. And it was. Just not in the way anyone expected. On the night of May 29th, 2005, their last night on the island, Natalee and her friends headed to Carlos and Charlie's, a popular nightclub in the capital city of Oranjestad. The club was packed with tourists and locals, music pumping, drinks flowing. It was exactly the kind of place where teenagers on spring break wanted to be. Natalee was having fun, dancing with her friends, enjoying her last night of freedom before flying home the next morning. That night at Carlos and Charlie's would be the last time most of her friends would ever see her alive. To understand what happened next, we need to talk about the people Natalee met that night at Carlos and Charlie's. Joran Vandersloot was 17 years old, just a few months younger than Natalee. He was Dutch, but he'd been living on Aruba for several years with his family. His father, Paulus Vandersloot, was actually a judge in training on the island, which would later complicate the investigation in ways nobody could have predicted. Joran was with two friends that night, brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpoe, who were 21 and 18 respectively. The three young men had come to Carlos and Charlie's looking for tourist girls, which wasn't unusual for young locals in a place like Aruba. Multiple witnesses later recalled seeing Joran talking to Natalee at the bar. They were chatting, drinking, laughing. To everyone watching, it looked like typical club flirting. Nothing remarkable, nothing alarming. Around 1:30 in the morning, as the club was closing down, several of Natalee's friends saw her leave. She was getting into a gray Honda with three young men, Joran Vandersloot and the Kalpoe brothers. Her friends didn't think much of it at the time. Natalee was 18, legally an adult. She seemed fine, maybe a bit tipsy, but certainly not incapacitated. They assumed she was getting a ride back to the Holiday Inn, which was only a few minutes away. They assumed she'd see them at the airport in a few hours for their morning flight home. They were wrong. May 30th, 2005. The scheduled departure day. As the Mountain Brook students gathered in the hotel lobby with their luggage, preparing to head to the airport, someone noticed that Natalee wasn't there. At first, they figured she'd overslept. Someone went to her room to wake her up. The door was locked from the outside. When they got a key from hotel staff and opened it, they found Natalee's room exactly as she'd left it the day before. Her bed hadn't been slept in. Her suitcase was packed and ready to go. Her passport was sitting on the dresser. Natalee Holloway had never come back to her hotel room. Within minutes, her friends were frantically searching the hotel, calling her name, checking every possible place she might be. The beach, the pool, other rooms. Nothing. The chaperones were notified. Hotel security got involved. And then someone remembered. Natalee had left with those three guys from the club, the guys in the gray Honda. One of Natalee's friends knew their names. She'd been talking to them earlier in the trip. Joran Vandersloot, Deepak and Satish Kalpoe. The chaperones immediately contacted Aruban police and made a call that would change everything. They phoned Natalee's mother, Beth Holloway, back in Alabama. Beth Holloway received the call that every parent dreads. Your daughter is missing. She didn't come back to the hotel. Nobody knows where she is. Beth didn't hesitate. Within hours, she had chartered a private jet with family members and friends. They flew through the night, landing in Aruba that same evening, less than 24 hours after Natalee had vanished. Armed with the names her daughter's classmates had provided, Beth Holloway went straight from the airport to the Holiday Inn, then to Carlos and Charlie's nightclub, and then, with a growing sense of urgency and terror, to the front door of the Vandersloot family home. She demanded to know where her daughter was. The search for Natalee Holloway had officially begun. In those first chaotic hours and days, the search for Natalee Holloway was largely improvised and driven by her family and friends. About 100 volunteers, a mix of tourists still on the island and local residents, began combing the beaches near the Holiday Inn, searching through scrubland, checking empty lots and construction sites. Beth Holloway and her family were everywhere, showing Natalee's photo to anyone who would look, asking questions, demanding action from local authorities. The Aruban police initially treated the case as a possible runaway situation. After all, Natalee was 18, legally an adult. Maybe she'd met someone. Maybe she'd decided to extend her trip. It happens sometimes with tourists. But Beth knew better. Natalee's packed luggage, her passport, her complete absence of communication, none of it fit the runaway theory. Something terrible had happened to her daughter, and every passing hour made finding her more urgent. As media coverage intensified and pressure mounted from American officials, the Aruban government began to take the case more seriously. The search effort expanded dramatically. Aruban police mobilized their entire force. Dutch Marines stationed on the island joined the effort. Search and rescue teams from the Netherlands arrived with specialized equipment. At one point, 3 F-16 fighter jets were deployed to conduct aerial surveillance of the island and surrounding waters. The search became massive, methodical, and exhausting. Search teams worked in brutal Caribbean heat, moving methodically across the island's terrain. They focused on several key areas. The beaches and coastal zones near the Holiday Inn and other northern resorts were swept repeatedly. Cadaver dogs were brought in from the United States, specifically from Texas, trained to detect human remains even if buried or submerged. The inland areas presented their own challenges. Aruba is small, only about 70 square miles, but much of it is covered in rough, rocky terrain with thick scrub brush. Limestone formations create natural caves and pits. Search teams probed these areas with ground-penetrating radar and sonar equipment. Offshore, boats equipped with side-scan sonar mapped the ocean floor, looking for anything that might indicate a body or evidence. Specialized dive teams explored underwater areas near popular swimming spots and boat launches. There were moments of hope that turned into crushing disappointments. In one instance, search teams found strands of hair attached to duct tape along the northeastern coast of the island. The discovery seemed promising, a potential breakthrough. The evidence was immediately sent to FBI laboratories for analysis. The results came back. The hair did not belong to Natalee Holloway. Another heavily publicized search focused on an anomaly detected by sonar near a fish trap off the coast. Video footage showed what appeared to be a human skull on the ocean floor. Dive teams were mobilized. Media helicopters hovered overhead. The world watched and waited. When divers finally reached the object and brought it to the surface, it wasn't a skull at all, just a rock formation that happened to look like one on grainy underwater video. Despite the massive scale of the operation, despite the military resources, the specialized equipment, the hundreds of volunteers, and the millions of dollars spent, the searches came up empty, again and again. No body, no clothing, no phone, no jewelry, no physical evidence whatsoever that could tell investigators what had happened to Natalee Holloway after she got into that gray Honda at 1:30 in the morning. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. But while the physical search continued, another investigation was unfolding. One focused on the 3 young men who were the last known people to see Natalee alive. And their stories? They didn't add up, not even close. From the moment Beth Holloway showed up at their door, Joran Vandersloot and the Cowpo brothers knew they were under suspicion. They were the last people seen with Natalee. Of course the police wanted to talk to them. But here's where things get complicated, and frankly, bizarre. In their initial statements to police, all 3 young men told the same story. Yes, they'd met Natalee at Carlos and Charlie's. Yes, she'd gotten in the car with them. but they claimed they'd simply given her a ride back to her hotel, dropped her off near the Holiday Inn around 2 in the morning, and watched her walk toward the entrance. Then they'd driven away. Simple, straightforward, innocent. There was just one problem. It wasn't true. Hotel security footage showed no sign of Natalee returning that night. Security guards on duty didn't see her. Her key card was never used. Everything pointed to the fact that Natalee never made it back to the Holiday Inn. When confronted with these inconsistencies, the stories began to change. Joran's second version of events was different. Now he claimed they hadn't taken her to the hotel at all. Instead, they'd driven to a beach near the Marriott Hotel, a stretch of sand called Fishermen's Huts. According to this account, Natalee wanted to see sharks, which apparently were sometimes visible in the shallow water there at night. Joran claimed he'd been alone with Natalee on the beach, getting romantic, while the Kalpoe brothers waited in the car. Then, he said, Natalee wanted to stay on the beach. He'd left her there, alive, unharmed, alone, and the Kalpoe brothers had driven him home. That was the last he'd seen of her. The Kalpoe brothers corroborated parts of this story, though their details didn't always match Joran's exactly. But this version raised more questions than it answered. What 18-year-old girl on her last night in a foreign country would choose to stay alone on a dark beach with complete strangers she'd just met? Why wouldn't she want to get back to her hotel before her morning flight? And if she decided to stay, how had she planned to get back to the Holiday Inn? None of it made sense. As pressure mounted, the stories continued to evolve. In subsequent interviews, Joran would provide different timelines, different locations, different details about what happened that night. Sometimes he claimed they'd been intimate. Other times he suggested nothing physical had happened at all. The Kalpoe brothers' accounts shifted too, though less dramatically. They maintained they'd simply been drivers, uninvolved in whatever may have happened between Joran and Natalee. On June 9, 2005, 10 days after Natalee's disappearance, Aruban authorities made their first arrests. Joran Vandersloot was taken into custody. So were Deepak and Satish Kalpoe. All three were detained on suspicion of involvement in Natalee's disappearance and possible murder. The arrests made international headlines. Finally, it seemed, justice might be served. But building a criminal case without a body, without physical evidence, and with nothing but conflicting witness statements is nearly impossible, even when you strongly suspect someone is lying. The Kalpoe brothers were released in early July after judges ruled there wasn't sufficient evidence to hold them. Joran was detained longer, but he too was eventually released. At various points, other individuals were briefly detained, including Joran's father, Paulus Vandersloot, based on witness statements that later proved unreliable. No one was ever charged with a crime related to Natalee's disappearance in Aruba. By late 2007, Aruban prosecutors made an announcement that devastated the Holloway family. Without new evidence or leads, they were closing the active investigation into Natalee's disappearance. The case would remain open technically, they said, and could be reopened if credible information emerged. But for all practical purposes, the investigation had hit a dead end. The massive searches had found nothing. The interrogations had produced nothing but contradictory stories. The forensic teams had no physical evidence to analyze. The case that had captivated the world, that had mobilized governments and generated thousands of headlines, had simply run out of leads to follow. For Beth Holloway and her family, this was unacceptable. They refused to give up. They continued their own investigation, hired private detectives, pursued every possible lead, no matter how unlikely. Because somewhere out there, they believed, was the truth about what happened to Natalee. And one person knew exactly what that truth was. Then, in 2010, something happened that revealed just how dangerous Joran Vandersloot truly was. In May of that year, through an intermediary, Joran contacted Beth Holloway with an offer that seemed almost too cruel to be real. For hundreds of thousands of dollars, he would reveal the exact location of Natalee's remains. He claimed to know where her body was buried. Beth, desperate for closure and willing to try anything, worked with the FBI to set up a sting operation. Joran received an initial payment of $25,000. In exchange, he provided detailed information about where to find Natalee's body, a specific location on Aruba where she'd supposedly been buried. Investigators went to the location. They dug, they searched thoroughly. There was nothing there. Joran had lied again, this time in exchange for cash. The FBI charged him with extortion and wire fraud, federal crimes that crossed international borders. Finally, there would be legal consequences for Joran Vandersloot's actions. But before American authorities could extradite him from Peru, where he was traveling, something horrific happened. On May 30th, 2010, exactly 5 years to the day after Natalee Holloway disappeared, Joran Vandersloot murdered a 21-year-old Peruvian woman named Stephanie Flores Ramirez in his Lima hotel room. Security footage showed Stephanie entering Joran's room. Hours later, Joran was seen leaving alone, carrying bags. When hotel staff finally entered the room, they found Stephanie's body. She had been beaten and strangled. Joran fled to Chile, but was caught at the border. This time there was no ambiguity, no lack of evidence, no web of lies that could save him. He confessed to killing Stephanie Flores Ramirez and was convicted of murder in Peru. He received a 28-year prison sentence. The murder of Stephanie Flores devastated her family and shocked the world. It also confirmed what many had long suspected. Joran Vandersloot was capable of violence against young women. If he could murder Stephanie Flores in such a brutal way, what had he done to Natalee Holloway 5 years earlier? In January 2012, nearly 7 years after Natalee disappeared, an Alabama judge signed a court order declaring Natalee Ann Holloway legally dead. For legal purposes, for settling her estate, for insurance matters, for providing her family with some form of official closure, Natalee was now considered deceased as of May 30th, 2005, or shortly thereafter. But legal declarations don't answer the questions that haunt a family. Where was their daughter? What happened to her? Where could they go to mourn her? Beth Holloway continued her search. She appeared on television programs, advocated for missing persons causes, and pursued any lead that might finally tell her what happened to her daughter. Then, in 2023, something unexpected happened. Joran Vandersloot, serving his murder sentence in Peru, was temporarily extradited to the United States to face the extortion and wire fraud charges from 2010. As part of a plea agreement in the federal case, Joran finally provided a detailed confession about what happened to Natalee Holloway. According to his statement to authorities, he admitted that he killed Natalee on the beach that night in 2005. He described how it happened and what he claimed to have done with her body afterward, disposing of her remains in the ocean. For the Holloway family, this confession brought a mixture of relief and renewed pain. After 18 years, they finally had an admission of guilt from the person they'd always believed was responsible. But here's the crucial detail. While Joran's confession provided new information and appeared credible to investigators, no physical evidence has ever corroborated his account. No remains have been recovered. No DNA evidence has been found. Nothing that could independently verify his description of events. Legally, Joran Vandersloot admitted to killing Natalee Holloway. He accepted responsibility in a federal court proceeding. But from an investigative standpoint, the case still lacks the physical proof that would conclusively close it. After pleading guilty to the federal charges, Yoren was returned to Peru to continue serving his murder sentence there. He'll eventually face additional time in an American prison for the extortion conviction. But no amount of prison time changes the fundamental reality. Natalee Holloway's body has never been found. Her family still has no physical place to visit, no grave to tend, no final resting place to mark. The disappearance of Natalee Holloway captivated the world for nearly 2 decades. It sparked one of the most intensive international searches for a missing person in modern history. It generated countless headlines, television specials, documentaries, and books. It changed laws, influenced how missing persons cases are handled, and became a cautionary tale repeated to travelers everywhere. But at its heart, this story isn't about media coverage or international investigations. It's about a young woman whose life was stolen from her, about parents who never stopped fighting for answers, about a brother who lost his sister, about friends who carry the weight of that last night in Aruba. Natalee Holloway was 18 years old when she disappeared. She had a full scholarship waiting for her. She wanted to become a doctor. She had a family who loved her and a future full of possibilities. All of that ended in the early morning hours of May 30th, 2005, on a small Caribbean island that was supposed to be paradise.